disappointed in the vote, but the president has veto power, and there's not a two-thirds majority in both chambers to override the veto, so it's not going to change the policy in the end anyway. But I think this is a fruitless exercise and a pointless one, and I'm disappointed in it.
That was reaction from Speaker Mike Johnson after the U.S. House of Representatives voted against President Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada. 6 Republicans joined Democrats in a bipartisan push against the trade agenda. Now, the motion did pass, but it didn't get two-thirds majority, meaning when it lands on Trump's desk, he will almost certainly veto it. As results of the vote became clear, President Trump took to Truth Social, calling Canada, quote, among the worst in the world to deal with. He added, this country has, quote, taken advantage of the United States on trade for many years. Even as Trump continues to double down on his love for tariffs, last night's vote does signal wavering Republican support for the president's policies. So does this blow another hole in Trump's trade agenda, especially as midterms approach? And what might it mean for Canada-U.S. relations? Well, let's bring in our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is the former chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney, and he's the former Liberal cabinet minister. He's now senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative industry minister James Moore is also here. He's now policy advisor at Edelman, and former federal Conservative cabinet minister and MP Monty Sahlberg. He is the CEO of New West Public Affairs. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Christy, start with you on this one. I think a lot of people are reading a lot into this vote. It doesn't remove any of the tariffs, and Trump has a number of other levers he can pull, even if the Supreme Court does overturn them. But do you think that this does present somewhat of an opportunity for the Carney government here?
Well, yeah, it's typical, though, in the U.S. when the midterms arrive, the president suddenly, his or her power starts to seep away a little bit because those elections are so important, and incumbency eats away at your popularity in certain states more than others, and so some of those swing states become very vulnerable. And in this case, you've got 6 of them, voting with the Democrats in the Congress, and those are ones mostly that are affected by the agricultural tariffs that are on. So you think about potash as an example, vital for fertilizer in agricultural states. 80% of that comes from Canada, most of it from Saskatchewan. And so, the problem is that you increase the cost of those inputs, you make it much harder for those businesses to succeed, but also you raise prices for everybody in America. And the reality is, and I think it's starting to hit home with some voters in the United States, is if you start raising prices on tariffs, it's Americans that pay the new cost of that. So I think it's a risk for President Trump on the, kind of in terms of the electoral math. Having said that, though, this has to still pass the Senate, and then it's still probably going to be vetoed by President Trump. But that's not an outcome that he's hoping to get to, because I think he certainly, if he, depending on how many seats they lose in the midterms, which is normal for in most midterms for the incumbents, it could be an embarrassment for him, and it could be sort of the first real comment the American public has been able to make on his tariff strategy overall.
So, Monty, what should the Carney government do here going forward? I mean, so, speaking to Brian Clough, former senior advisor to the Prime Minister, or Deputy Chief of Staff, I should say, to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, it's like there's an opportunity here, but also they've done pretty well by just standing pat here.
Well, they should just stick to their guns. They have done a good job by standing pat. And let's face it, the president has a record of backing down on some of these pronouncements. He talks about 100% tariffs if Canada is going to trade with China. Well, that's not going to happen. He's stepped away from that. And I think there's every likelihood that he will see that he cannot go into the U.S. midterms without having a trade deal, because he's got all kinds of swing states that depend on trade with Canada. And you're starting to see some of those states in the U.S. heartland push back. You've got a big agriculture lobby made up, I think, a coalition of 40 agricultural groups who have come out publicly and said that they are committed to trying to get the president to agree to a new trade agreement with Canada. So that's a pretty strong sign, that he needs to listen to his own Congress and the people that vote for him typically, and get on board and support a trade agreement with Canada.
Marco, it wasn't so long ago, I think it was about 2 summers ago, that François-Philippe Champagne, I believe it was as industry minister, went down to the U.S. and continued that sort of charm offensive. It was ahead of the election and trying to really sort of impress upon the Americans how important Canada-U.S. trade is. We haven't seen a lot of that happening recently. Do you think there's an opportunity here for Canadian lawmakers to, continue to leverage those connections that they've made and sort of, continue to prime the pump here and say, hey, look, you had 6 vote against Trump here. You guys should really consider how important this is to you.
Yeah, hard to imagine a more charming, effervescent personality than François-Philippe Champagne for those of us who know him. But, I mean, is it too early to send a bouquet of flowers and a thank you card to the 6 Republicans who voted to remove these tariffs? Look, it was a narrow moral rebuke of, I think, a poorly founded tariff policy against Canada. And while it's tempting to exaggerate the victory, I think it's right to be level-headed in our assessment, precisely because of some of the reasons that have already been stated. One of which is that the resolution is not binding. The second of which is that the vote still essentially fell down along partisan lines. And the third of which is that I think it is a broader comment on how much control the president continues to exercise over the Republican Party in Congress, because we know many of those Republicans are in states who profit from good trade with Canada. And so I think going forward, you're right, there is an opportunity for the government. I hope that yesterday's vote serves as a bit of a permission or a license for more of our friends in the United States to speak up in favor of trade with Canada. Because while it may have been a bit of a moral victory for Canada, I think it's a hollow victory for Americans who are paying more for food, who are paying more for fuel, who are just generally paying more across the board, and in part because of these higher tariffs.
James, it sort of occurs to me that, and we will be talking about this in our next segment, about how there is sort of more collaboration going on this side of the border. Do you think that this also presents that kind of opportunity when you consider that it seems like there is that opening, as we've all sort of, agreed upon here, that on this side that there could be more of that opportunity, even as the MP, Jamil Javani, came back from the U.S. from his trip as well. Do you think that there's something to be done on politics on this side of the border when we see what happens there with this vote?
Well, I think there's broad stroke co-alignment between the 2 governing parties in Canada about the North American platform and free trading with the United States as best as possible, and backstopping industries that are under threat by Donald Trump's tariffs. So I think that there is room on that front. Pierre Poilievre's put out an olive branch. I think the Prime Minister has been gracious in his public comments as well. But I think in this whole dynamic in the United States, I think our watchwords need to be keep calm and carry on, and recognize what's happening in the United States, that while we're talking about this vote in Congress over tariff policy, it's not getting noticed in the United States in media, informed media, or with the broad general public, because I don't know if you noticed or not, but the United States is having a bit of a moment here, and it's not a good moment. From the streets of Minneapolis and people getting shot to the cultural divide, the Epstein files, Pam Bondi perjuring herself before a congressional committee and embarrassing herself, to the manosphere bro culture podcasters who are abandoning Donald Trump over the Epstein files and Minnesota, to the shifting in the American economy. The United States is undergoing a crunch here. And then you've got primary season coming up on the congressional side and a third of the Senate. Donald Trump saying he's going to implement himself and get engaged engaged in the midterm campaign. The United States is going through an extraordinary political division here. And if Canada sticks its head out and puts its hand in the tiger's mouth here, it's going to get chomped off here, either by President Trump or others. Our obligation should be to the domestic Canadian economy to engage in those reconsideration conversations about the CUSMA agreement when the time comes. Make sure that we have our roundtables and policy workshops moving forward effectively within Canada, and stay out of the way. And don't become the next chapter in this now decades-long Donald Trump daily reality show. We have 1,000 more days left of this presidency, and we should just keep calm and carry on and focus on our own backyard. And that's what I think Canadians expect of the Prime Minister and expect of this Parliament.
And be happy that China hasn't taken hockey away from us yet, as Trump predicted.
The day is young, but but no, not yet. Yeah.
Yeah, we got that win over Czechia, so I think that's important.